He had always believed in love, the kind that lasts forever. When he married Sarah, it felt like a dream come true. They had been college sweethearts, built a life together, and shared laughter that once felt endless. Everyone saw them as the perfect couple, the ones who had it all. But beneath the surface, something was missing. At first, it was easy to ignore. The routine of life, work, social obligations, weekend plans, kept him busy enough not to dwell on the growing distance between them. Conversations became transactional, limited to schedules, bills, and responsibilities. He told himself this was normal. Marriage wasn't about constant excitement. It was about commitment. And he was committed. Sarah was everything he had once wanted, driven, intelligent, beautiful. She had big dreams, and she chased them relentlessly. But somewhere along the way, her priorities shifted. Success became her obsession, and love became an afterthought. He admired her ambition, but felt like a shadow in their marriage. When he spoke, she listened half-heartedly, distracted by her phone or her own thoughts. Their intimacy faded, replaced by polite smiles and carefully chosen words. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. He tried to spark a conversation, reminiscing about their early days, but she barely looked up. "That was a long time ago," she said with a faint smile before returning to her emails. It was in that moment he realized he felt lonelier in her presence than when he was alone. Despite this, he never considered leaving. He had made a promise, and promises weren't meant to be broken. He convinced himself that all marriages went through phases, that this was just one of them. Maybe one day, she would slow down. Maybe one day, she would look at him the way she used to. But deep down, he knew the truth. The love they had was no longer the love they needed. And yet, he stayed, hoping, waiting, until something or someone changed everything. It started as an ordinary day, nothing unusual or out of place. He was on his way to a client meeting, running late, frustrated by the usual chaos of the city. Then, a small, unexpected moment changed everything. A cafe, a chance encounter, and a woman who would unknowingly shift the course of his life. She wasn't striking in a way that turned heads, but there was something about her, a quiet warmth, and ease in the way she carried herself. They exchanged polite words at first, a casual conversation sparked by circumstance. But within minutes, it felt like he had known her forever. Her laughter wasn't forced, her eyes weren't distracted. She listened, not out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity. The conversation flowed effortlessly, something he hadn't experienced in years. He found himself sharing details he hadn't spoken about in ages, his love for old music, the places he wanted to visit, the book he never finished reading. She smiled, amused, as if she understood him in a way no one else had. He had forgotten what it felt like to be truly heard. At first, he thought nothing of it. It was just a fleeting interaction, a brief escape from his monotonous reality. But fate, or something like it, had other plans. They crossed paths again, and again, each meeting as unplanned as the last. The connection deepened, though neither of them acknowledged it. He told himself it was harmless. There was no betrayal in a conversation, no disloyalty in enjoying someone's company. But he couldn't ignore the way he felt lighter around her, how he looked forward to their unexpected encounters. With her, he wasn't a husband trapped in a fading marriage. He was just himself. Guilt crept in, subtle at first, then heavier with each interaction. He reminded himself of his vows, of the woman waiting for him at home. But then came the realization that shook him. He had never felt this alive in his own marriage. And that truth, no matter how much he tried to suppress it, refused to be ignored. The weight of it all became unbearable. Every moment spent with her felt like a stolen piece of happiness, but the guilt loomed over him like a shadow. He had convinced himself that he was only seeking friendship, a connection that had nothing to do with betrayal. But he knew better. His heart was already caught in a place it didn't belong. At home, everything felt different. Sarah hadn't changed. She was still busy, still distant, but now he noticed it more. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was emptiness. He started avoiding conversations, finding excuses to stay out longer, to delay the inevitable. The more he tried to ignore his feelings, the stronger they became. One evening, as he sat across from Sarah at the dinner table, he felt a crushing sense of detachment. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. He wanted to say something, to tell her how lost he felt, but the words didn't come. Instead, he studied her, wondering if she had noticed the change in him. If she did, she didn't show it. The turning point came unexpectedly. A simple text message from the woman he couldn't stop thinking about, a message that shouldn't have meant anything, but did. It wasn't romantic, not even suggestive, but it carried a warmth that had been missing from his life for too long. He stared at it, feeling something he hadn't in years, genuine happiness. The realization hit hard. He was emotionally unfaithful. He hadn't crossed any physical boundaries, but he had crossed every emotional one. He was giving another woman the parts of himself that Sarah no longer saw or no longer wanted. For days, he wrestled with the truth. Staying in a marriage where he felt invisible was safe, expected. But was it right? Was it fair to either of them? The guilt, the love, the loyalty, all tangled into a mess he couldn't untangle. When the moment of truth came, it wasn't planned. A conversation turned into an argument, a suppressed emotion spilled into reality. And in that moment, Sarah finally looked at him, really looked at him. Maybe she had known all along. Maybe she had been waiting for this too. Either way, there was no going back. The truth, once spoken, could not be taken back. The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. Sarah didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stared at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Maybe it was disappointment, maybe relief. Either way, the silence that followed was louder than any argument they had ever had. She asked the one question he had been dreading, "Do you love her?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real. And it was real. He wasn't in love with the woman he had married anymore. He had been holding on to an idea, a memory of love that had faded long ago. He lowered his gaze and nodded. That was all she needed to see. The days that followed were a blur of unspoken emotions and necessary conversations. There was no dramatic fight, no desperate attempts to change what was already broken. They both knew this was inevitable. Divorce papers were drawn up, and just like that, a decade of their lives was reduced to signatures on a page. The world didn't take kindly to his decision. Friends whispered, family judged, and he was branded as the man who walked away. But no one saw the years of loneliness, the slow erosion of a love that had once been everything. No one understood that staying would have been the real betrayal. When he finally stood in front of the woman who had unknowingly changed everything, there was no grand confession, no poetic speech. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been there all along. She didn't ask if he was sure. She could see it in his eyes. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Love wasn't about holding on to what was familiar. It was about choosing what was real, even when it was difficult, even when it came at a cost.